Hello and welcome again to the JTC channel. There are some important updates specifically for you guys. And so regardless of how anyone now chooses to see the crime scene of this crime in the Murdaugh case, I now firmly believe that Alex Murdaugh had an accomplice. I am officially going with the theory, as it were, that none other than Nathan Tuten and perhaps also Nolan Tuten have been involved with this Murdaugh murder since the very beginning. I believe that there is something clear-cut to the fact that it has been mentioned that it was none other than Rogan Gibson who was named as the chief principal and administrator whom took care of and managed the dog kennels. There had to be someone, right, who would take care of the dogs every single day. And based upon available hard evidence, it appears that was actually Rogan Gibson, who was assigned to manage and run the kennels. Gibson was said to take care of the kennel's main needs, including servicing and feeding. However, I also believe that my other part of this theory may end up being true. And that is Rogan Gibson was not the one who ran the kennels during the time period mentioned of the month of June when the tragedy occurs at the Murdaugh estate. Regardless of what occurs now, should Alex Murdaugh be the only scapegoat who goes down, or someone actually goes down with him, I now officially believe there was an outside party involved with Alex during the commission of these murders. I believe Alex had an accomplice based upon first-hand evidence I have seen of none other than Nathan Tuten and Nolan Tuten's name being on certain specific records as well as legal documents dealing with the case which was filed during the boat crash incident and the people who received the proceeds involved. Specifically, the insurance discharge which occurred not more than 6 months or 1 year before the murders take place at Moselle. I base this upon certain hard evidence, which was also covered at the scene. Agent Matthew Wild testifies to the fact that apparently cell phone pings kept pinging in the exact area and radius on Moselle during the time Alex Murdaugh's cell phone officially pings inside the dog kennels for a second time after 8:58 p.m. I also base it upon certain testimony given by an expert agent who worked with Agent Wild, who showed that an unknown cell phone ping occurs in the same area during the evening hours, right? And the ping could not be traced to Alex Murdaugh's phone. In other words, we see that there is an unknown ping. There is no real information on how that ping occurred. It still occurs in the Moselle property, yet remains unknown, leading me to believe it belonged to the getaway driver, who may turn out to be Nathan. I will also briefly be showing certain records which lead me to the logical conclusion that Tuten is involved. Mr. Tuten testified on the stand. I don't know if it was indeed the first time, but it seemed like the first time when I saw everything I did. He stated that he lived on the property of the Moselle estate directly next door to the dog kennels at an area known as the Log Cabin. He testified to the fact that he would go with Paul Murdaugh back and forth from the Log Cabin to none other than the dog kennels themselves. Not just once or twice a year, he says, but every single day or every day. This is the only witness I've seen testify so far or at any time during the case, whom indicated they visited the kennels every single day, which is yet to be acknowledged or printed in corroborated testimonies. So I officially put forth the theory now, no longer 80% certain. I am now just about 100% certain, okay, that Nathan Tuten was involved in the Paul and Maggie Murdaugh murders. He knew about this incident in question and may have at minimum called Alex Murdaugh's cell phone at a time that is after hours, which simply does not make real sense when looking at the timeline and the facts. It could be explained circumstantially due to testimony he makes on the stand where he openly admits to taking care of the personal effects every single day for Maggie Murdaugh, which includes legal papers and at times was rumored to include clothing. Murdaugh and someone else was involved at that time while he lived in the actual log cabin. And he would do all of these favors every day during the, usual week. He said it was a thing he regularly does by taking checks and cash and certain instruments to exchange them every week as a routine for the company. Well, I am claiming it officially now and putting it forward on the record for this theory. That is not just something you regularly do at all. Not in any kind of estate case. And potentially, he was running favors that are outside what normally occurs in the daily business when living on an estate. He was very involved with Paul Murdaugh, it says in the actual official record. And in this way that he was involved, he may have even covered up elements of the actual crime scene. Nathan Tuten was very close to Rogan Gibson. After all, he acknowledges in his resume that he was an expert with OnStar type car scenarios and technology in general, due to his heightened position in the Walterboro Police Force. Something that he admitted in an earlier filing that is in the court records as well. Yet it did not ever become 100% clear to me until I heard the fact that Nathan Tuten would, in fact, always go with Paul Murdaugh to shoot birdshot directly next to the dog kennels themselves. And that was never explained at all, especially that he went and used 300 blackout rounds daily. A slip of the tongue? Hard to say. He did not state it was just during a vacation. He repeated this is something they would do daily at the dog kennels well into June. Of course, real birdshot casings were found in the body of both Paul and Maggie Murdaugh during the unfortunate incident. Here and really notice this for a moment, okay? This is a real key piece of evidence. Actually, it's hard evidence in this case because it's a shot. It's kind of a still shot.
Left-hand side back towards the forest end.
And a screenshot of the actual kennel at night. And if you look out right there in the path, kind of behind the tree, the grove of trees, it's right there directly next to where they're holding some of the later dogs. That has a back road attached to it, okay? That's not just an empty grove. It has kind of a back road area attached to it, and that goes directly to where the cabin is located, which I've shown you guys. That cabin that was discussed there kind of in that testimony towards the end, when Tuten is also testifying in the trial, that cabin is located not more than a few hundred feet away from the dog kennel. So it's literally right next to it. And in a way, that really is quite, quite eye-opening, right? It opens up some different scenarios that may have played out. Because it would be very easy for someone like Alex Murdaugh to get around to each of these areas and do what the data suggests, as long as he had a driver, who was moving him around. And that, in that context, then makes a lot more, logical sense. And when you think about the fact that they didn't really show in these screenshots the area that's kind of behind there. You can explore it, right? They got like a back road. They got like a back area that kind of cuts away from the trees. And they have, out away from the road, they have like kind of a canal type area all the way out, out there. And they just have a very interesting setting back there. The cabin is secluded in a spot that's just basically a hop, skip away. So we could say, for example, folks, if Alex Murdaugh desired to get out of there in a hurry, faster than normal, he could just have, say, Nathan, in this example, hose him off right there near the area of the trees. He wouldn't even have to do it directly at the dog kennel necessarily. Although he probably was hosed down at the kennel, because if somebody else is doing it versus Alex attempting to do it himself, it takes less than like 10 minutes. It really takes only about 7 minutes. And it then starts to truly fit the timeline, the context of the timeline. So I needed you guys to be sure to see this. Thank you again. It's your support that makes this possible. Be certain to keep spreading the news. Let's get this out there to the general public. But the whole thing is that cabin. That's a real key question. What really was the environment around that cabin? And I'll be exploring that kind of just visually, so you can see we're talking about something interesting here. The trajectory of the bullet, right? It wasn't like just straight across like you would normally see with bullets when they get cast. They get shot straight, in a straight line. It was cast more or less at an arc. So it was shot at kind of an angle. And so when it hit the victims, you would see the residue effect of the casings that notate the fact that the bullet actually was shot at an angle. And the shooter in that case most likely, stumbled just a little bit while they had their firearm. So very, very key, key points, and a lot of very, very important things to take away from this. Thank you. Matter, the County Court for the 6th Judicial Circuit in Pinellas County, Florida, Civil Division, in the matter of Holly K. Gall as trustee and the Bergen Family Land Trust as plaintiff versus Nathan Tuten and Angeline Liberati. Default judgment for possession has been entered. It is herefore ordered and adjudged. The default judgment will be the same, entered in favor of the plaintiff against defendants Nathan Tuten and Angeline Liberati for possession of the premises on New Hampshire Avenue in St. Petersburg, Florida. The plaintiff shall recover from defendants the sum, grand total of 0, and costs for which let the execution, which is forthwith sent. It is so ordered in chambers for Pinellas County, Florida, on the 30th of January. And I have to be very careful with my words here. This is a confirmed court document with none other than Nathan D. Tuten, who was in fact the brother. Some say cousin, but it's been noted that it's basically the brother of Nathan Tuten of South Carolina. This court matter and the court that officially entered the order is in Pinellas County, Florida, and the case in question has several different citations and occurred at the approximate same time Nathan Tuten officially moved into Moselle, South Carolina. So this happened concurrently. It also happened again in 2018. And Nathan Tuten of South Carolina was in support of essentially a family member who was going through something very, very challenging, most certainly. This is an executed writ of possession, so ordered to be in default. And other similar individuals involved for the great work, both on this case and on other legal matters. It shows one Renee S. Beach and Philip Beach are suing Gregory M. Parker and the Parker Law Group over the sudden tragic death of Mallory Beach. Those involved in the actual physical suit are Savannah Tuten and Seth Tuten, both physical family and direct relatives to one Nathan Tuten of South Carolina. And the other important aspect of this, which will be shown, is the court case dealing with Nathan Tuten's brother. I believe it is his brother now, that occurs in Florida during this exact time period. Thank you.
What he would do with his phone? Do you recall if Paul did have to use his phone? Would he put it in any of his pockets?
If he was working outside in that capacity, the pocket he would put it in would be his back pocket.
And that was the common thing he would do almost near
The sheds more, whereas Alec and Maggie would use the main gate entrance more.
If you all, and let me ask you, what were the, before we get to my next question, what the hangar area with the kennels, are you familiar with it?
That's correct.
Could you describe to the jury just a very basic layout of that area?
It was kennels as you're riding into the driveway. The kennels would be on your left. The shed or hangar would be directly on your right. There was another shed that they had built in front of the hangar, and there was a skinning shed for animals out back to the right.
And would you spend a lot of time down at the hangar area and kennel area?
We would.
Why would y'all hang out there? Why was that the kind of the collection place?
It's just a central location where everything was located.
Tools?
Correct.
And farm equipment?
Following a rigorous 2-month full court press by the attorneys representing Gloria Satterfield's former estate and family, the institution reached a settlement for the alleged role of the $4.3 million in the wrongful death settlement scheme that was launched first by Alex Murdaugh. South Carolina attorneys Eric Bland and Ronald Richter stated Thursday that Palmetto State Bank settled with Gloria's sons Tony Satterfield and Brian Harriott for an undisclosed settlement amount. The action ends the pending suit against Palmetto State Bank, leaving Alex Murdaugh as the only remaining defendant who hasn't been granted settlement payee status. Satterfield, who was the Murdaugh's family housekeeper for 2 decades, died after an alleged trip and fall accident at Alex Murdaugh's estate. On September 15th, Bland and Richter filed the suit in the Satterfield family on behalf and against Murdaugh, Fleming, and others involved in the 2018 settlement amid the original boat crash incident. Other defendants include Fleming's law firm, Moss, Cohn and Fleming, Chad Westendorf, the banker, for Satterfield Estate and Palmetto State Bank itself. Palmetto State Bank is the fifth liable party to have settled or resolved differences with the Satterfield family since this accident occurred. The two attorneys recovered more than $6.5 million for Satterfield. They won't be able to be exploited by hangers-on or grifters. It is a true kind of way that Mallory Beach and Gloria Satterfield's lives were not lost in vain. They now serve a purpose, and they have exposed the system that needs fixing and people that need to lose their livelihoods and licenses because of breaking that trust. Well, we'll see about that. But my point in coming back to this, folks, is the Satterfield case is central to the PMPED law firm, which is now known as Parker Law Group. And, you're going to wonder again, where does Nathan Tuten enter the picture? His name was on the official firm and on the letterhead for PMPED during the time of the Gloria Satterfield settlement. He arrived there in 2019 to start doing courier work and official legal kind of representative work for the firm. And at that time, the Gloria Satterfield settlement was still ongoing. So Mr. Tuten stood to actually benefit hugely from not only being able to take whatever cut he would like out of the settlement that was finally reached in late 2019 and was paid back to the Satterfield estate, essentially, but he also would benefit in an enormous way, actually, from the actual settlement that's reached finally in regards to the boat incident itself. And so people have been wondering, for a while, in what different ways does he factor in? Well, he was a good friend. He was the best friend at the firm of Corey Fleming again. And this was at the exact same time they had to go to probate to resolve the Satterfield settlement. The settlement money was not going to be resolved any other way. So there's quite a bit that goes into that. He would run the actual checks for the attorneys, including Fleming, during the Satterfield settlement. He would run actual legal documents for them, and he would cash, the other outer checks for them at that exact time. And he was in service to the firm, doing his own specific legal work at that time, which makes for an interesting dynamic. And I go over that again in the next part. It says he can admit fault in the suit, which is what he did for his brother and law partner's lawsuits, in a move that essentially prioritizes their ability to recover funds and damages for the victims of the alleged financial crimes during the Murdaugh financial meltdown. For a second option in the suit, Alex Murdaugh may deny it, which further torpedoes his spiraling reputation considering his shady moves last week and all the evidence that has already been stacked against him in the case. He would therefore have no choice but to plead the fifth. 2 weeks ago, approximately, Mr. Bland stated that the Satterfield family and Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Elstroth, and Dietrich, PMPED group, reconciled their differences officially to go ahead and reach full settlement. And then, of course, when they did that, this is what was going on directly at that same time. It states, Tuten, meaning Nathan Tuten in this case, was not a passenger on the boat owned by Alex Murdaugh, which crashed into the piling pier near Archers Creek Bridge outside of Paris Island, South Carolina, shortly after 2 a.m. The crash killed 19-year-old Mallory Beach of Hampton, South Carolina, injuring several other passengers. Alex Murdaugh's late son, Paul Murdaugh, was reportedly driving the 17-foot center console sea hunt fishing boat at the time it slammed into the piling. Prior to the violent death last spring, Paul Murdaugh faced multiple criminal charges in connection with this boat crash and could have found himself on the hook for serious charges. Hunter and Tuten, both of whom were called before the statewide grand jury, were questioned on the heels of the testimony reportedly provided to grand jurors by Jeannie Seckinger, who was the comptroller for PMPED law firm. Seckinger has appeared before the statewide grand jury at least once, sources familiar with the inquiry told me, although it is not immediately clear what she was asked or how she answered those questions. Readers will recall PMPED claimed to have learned of Murdaugh's alleged financial misdeeds on September 2nd, 2021. The firm sued Murdaugh the following month, claiming he stole more than $10 million. Those claims were greeted with suspicion among those who were investigating Murdaugh's financial largesse, especially now that the law firm was implicated in the chicanery itself. What were Harder as well as Tuten specifically asked, and how did they respond? My sources did not provide much in the way of specific information about the interrogation, although I am informed the two young men took vastly different tacks in responding to investigators during this time. One particular question posed to both law firm runners involved the delivery of the actual payments and checks to various recipients, one of whom is stated to be the sitting state lawmaker. My sources declined to identify the lawmaker. However, the handoff is reportedly described as a campaign contribution. The payout, which raised red flags, was reportedly made to law enforcement officers, and the handoff was reportedly described as a legitimate settlement payout. And by settlement payout, they're talking about, again, things related to the Satterfield estate payout and also the settlement that had to occur for the boating accident itself. See, to be clear, neither Harder nor Austin were implicated yet. Stay tuned. I plan on continuing to keep you in the loop. So this is a vital portion here, folks, because this is from the court filing itself. Nathan Tuten is mentioned several times. He answers these questions, just very casually. Says, what went on the boat? They say they went onto the boat and they went over to Rose Island. Who were you with? It was just me. I don't think we stayed anywhere that night. It was just during the day. It was me, Paul, and that boy named Nathan Tuten. It was Miley and Morgan, and that was it. Now, why is this so significant again, folks? Because Nathan Tuten is confirmed to be there during the exact time they're signing the paperwork for the Gloria Satterfield settlement, and when the law firm comes up with the first settlement arrangement for the boat crash. That's why it's so significant. And Nathan Tuten is not just, a field runner. He's the principal associate, right? So he is the one who takes care of all of the work for PMPED at the time. And he's there during that time frame of 2019 to 2021. And so therefore, there's a lot of advantages that he was afforded, and a lot of real key questions that need to be answered. He would run the messages, the checks, and also the packages back and forth as the chief associate, undersecretary paralegal for PMPED Group. So the fact that he may have been involved, which is what I am directly implying now, because his brother, right, whose name is Nathan D. Tuten, you're going to see that for a minute in the video as well, he had a serious incident occur in Florida, and it's essentially in the same exact area where they were settling part of the boat case, which I found to be very fascinating. And it's hard evidence that shows his brother, his direct brother, and it may be his cousin, okay? It appears, though, to be Nathan Tuten's direct brother, was implicated in a very serious scandal, all right, in Florida State. And this was during this same time frame. So given the evidence and given the hard evidence that's being uncovered there, it stands to reason then, especially in this particular video, that there are a lot of advantages for Mr. Tuten, given their history and given Nathan Tuten's history at PMPED, for him to be involved in this. Maybe not as anything more than the cleanup person, but he had access to SLED computers due to being kind of a supervisor of sorts inside Walterboro Police Department. So he had access to be able to kind of mess around with OnStar. And the key thing here is, as this really gets fleshed out more, he was living at the actual cabin directly by the dog kennel itself. And so it stands to reason, if anyone, besides maybe Fleming or someone, was higher up at PMPED, if anyone would benefit hugely from Murdaugh essentially kind of falling down, so to speak, and going down for the count, it would most certainly be Tuten. And I found some interesting information, that's still being heavily dissected, which shows him, his brother, Nolan Tuten, doing something very interesting in regards to the legal case. Not the murder case, but the legal case regarding the insurance settlements. And you have to remember, this is taking place at the exact same time Gloria Satterfield is finally getting everything she asked for out of Murdaugh. So he has an opportunity there. He has a small window of opportunity to benefit in a huge financial way. And sometimes that's all it takes to look the other way, and assist with a murder. So this has been an excellent video, and some more showing of the actual dog kennels, as well as where the cabin is actually located. And I appreciate you guys most of all, or who make this all possible. So if you get insight, you get ideas and things you wish to share to be able to move this forward, because I do see this as a very serious thing. And I see that should it be the case that someone else was involved with Mr. Murdaugh, and indeed looks like it may well have been Tuten, then that is something very serious that needs to be fully investigated on the public record. And also, that ties back to what actually happened to that settlement money. And I think one of the things that would answer it once and for all, just how kind of deep some of these participants, like Tuten, for example, got into it, is where the settlement money actually went. Did it truly go back into Satterfield's hands, as they claim, and the victims of the boat crash, as it's originally claimed? Or is it more than likely plausible that a good amount of it just got slushed off into a private account run by, for example, Nathan Tuten himself, right? And then, of course, another attorney who was formerly at the firm, perhaps Corey Fleming, okay? But I'm just looking at it from the standpoint, if I was someone and I wish to make real problems disappear, maybe I'm not really, just a downright person who would commit murders and things like that, but I see an opportunity to make a lot of things disappear, then that would make me more inclined to assist with the cover-up of a possible double homicide. And that, more and more, folks, is what looks to be the case here. So thank you. There's more to review, and I appreciate all of you. You are who make this channel. This is the kind of composite scene that I was talking about. And a shout out definitely to Fitz News, who is someone I'm going to be very interested in talking with. But I particularly like this one, folks, because it gives you a full, true 3D creation of that crime scene that you're looking at. And so you see where the dog kennels are here. You see Maggie. She was, sadly, she was shot at an arc right here in that key spot. But then there's this kind of back path, and it goes around the tree line. The trees are easier to see in this image. I really enjoy this, of course, doing this for you guys. I'm going to be getting the one that's also created by Faro, the 3D imaging version of this exact, composite crime scene, so you can really get a feel of it yourself, okay? But the pathway you can see comes directly through the tree line, and this is something that they didn't indicate in the actual court, although I'm certain that they'll mention it at some point. It'll be a key detail they do have to mention, okay? But that path comes directly through this tree line here, and it goes straight here to where you find the old log cabin. And that cabin where I've got my pointer at is just really just directly over the trees, so it's almost like a hop skip down the hill from where the victims are basically shot. And so that there's also, of course, this storage room area where something could have been stashed. It would definitely be worth revisiting that. If somebody would just dig in that area, kind of dig in the direct vicinity underneath there, they probably might find something very vital to the crime scene. So anyway, it essentially means that Alex could have really just gone, kind of a hop skip here, and he would have been at the cabin, right? So he would have been out of the vicinity of where everybody goes. He'd just be kind of hidden at this old smoky cabin, essentially is what they really call it. And it's just effortless then to take a shower, get fully hosed off. And we see here that there's a path directly in between each of these key areas, these key spots. So if he stopped by the storage area, he tossed something aside, he still would have had more than enough time, okay? Specifically, if someone was driving him, he would be able to get there the fastest. But since it really is just only down the hill, if you were to do it on foot, and you were running, or something to that effect, you could probably get over to where the little cabin is in around 8 minutes. I mean, it's not the distance people were, presuming it really was. It is a distance away from where the final doghouse is. But overall, it's not really out of the way. It's not like it's off the beaten path. And so that would allow for a lot of interesting possibilities to instantly emerge there. And I know you'll find it very interesting then when you listen to this next part here on the video, because I'm going to show you the person who was testifying about that cabin. It's kind of interesting just to be able to listen to it and really sit with the message that it's conveying to everybody. I went back and I ended up listening to it more than 4 times myself, just to truly get a sense of what this means and of what this ultimately means, for the case, and a lot of similar issues that have gone on with that particular situation for a long time. So look forward to that, and look also at the composite. I'm doing a short composite, and that will show kind of the trajectory of the actual bullet. And when you see that, you'll start to get the sense now that it is true. Somebody didn't just shoot them, straight across. There was an arc to the actual bullet. And that could, of course, only occur if it kind of occurred in the way that they're suggesting it did, which is Alex may have lost his balance for just a moment, or he was stumbling. And holding a rifle or just a shotgun in that case, and getting the kind of strange pattern of the arc of the bullet that you end up seeing, the only possibility that ultimately remains there is it had to have been a kind of unplanned shot, right? Like they might have stumbled for a moment. He might have kind of lost his footing for just a minute. And the firearm essentially pointed at an arc when it shot them. And then there's another bullet that's seen in the video, of course. It's just, the normal bullet that you would expect. But there is a bullet in there, especially in Maggie, which shot kind of an arc. And it was very eye-opening and very interesting to see that. It makes us realize that there's a lot more to these crime scenes than we ever imagined. That we take them for granted, and there's a lot really to discover and learn for each of us. And so I encourage, especially those who are new to this, to really, sit with the crime scene and explore it further, because you're going to discover things that you just wouldn't have imagined. I guarantee it. Like the fact that Murdaugh went into the cabin. And it's getting to be very, very clear that he did go to the cabin. And I think that that's something that's maybe not right this second, but is going to end up being one of the most critical elements in this whole overall Murdaugh saga. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Just about every day. Every other day.
Phone calls?
That's correct.
And texts?
Primarily phone calls.
And later in life, did Paul go to school?
He did.
Where did he go?
USC.
And that's located where?
Columbia. Not aware of any, no.
I'm going to ask you, counsel asked you a little bit about the kennel area and as you can hurt water. Are you familiar with how generally the kennels were cleaned? Were you there when the kennels would be cleaned?
Sometimes.
Okay. Generally speaking, describe the kennel for me. What was actually inside of one of those?
If Bubba or the other dog had messed in their dog run, would he clean it up?
I'd say so.
Okay. And if he did that, perhaps he'd put his phone down while he did that so it wouldn't get wet.
So again, you have all seen kind of some examples of what it's like in the area there directly next to the dog kennels. next to the trees, and how the log cabin truly factors in to pretty much everything that's being discussed here, and how important and vital it is to include the element of the log cabin. Now, this information that's being shown here and so on is, of course, exclusive information, exclusive to the JTC channel and so on, but there will be others who will be discussing it as well. So if you have not ever heard of Mr. Tuten, for example, and of the log cabin and of other various theories that have been surrounding that for a while, you're going to hear that soon, most certainly. You know, look forward to that actually in the direct near future. And I'm going to do exclusively for the JTC channel, of course, a live broadcast, as I have indicated earlier, where I will be going over some of these key questions, these key issues that people really have. The key thing to remember about all of this is it doesn't make sense. The timeline doesn't truly add up. If Alex Murdaugh was the one who did all these things that the prosecution is, showcasing and so on, that he supposedly did within that time frame of the 40 minutes, 35 minutes approximated. However, it does begin to finally get crystal clear and have the timeline incidentally perfectly match when you consider the fact Alex Murdaugh wasn't alone. And he did have a getaway driver, so to speak. And that, as has been mentioned here exclusively on this channel, of course, is very likely Mr. Tuten in this particular issue, dealing with a number of key factors. And so that's going to be a very, very important element, And all I can say is, they're saying that the defense and the other cross-examination is going to call Alex Murdaugh essentially to the stand to have him testify. And all I'll say to that is he's certainly going to need all the help he can get, because the prosecution has been holding back these key, I would say, hidden bombshells, and they're going to be dropped. Okay, folks? And I'm telling you right now, this whole element, this theory, as they call it, dealing with Mr. Tuten and dealing with the fact that he was most likely the getaway driver and so on, this is based upon very, very solid facts. And so it's going to be brought up in one way or another. In various discussion circles, it's going to get very loud out there. Maybe brought up in the court in certain areas as well too. Okay? But it's a key factor because it explains why the old cabin is a significant piece to this whole entire case. I always wondered about the old cabin myself, okay? But now that you see how the cabin, right? We see that whole example there with the cabin being directly next to the actual dog kennels, it starts to finally come together. It starts to truly make sense. If he was able to get into the cabin, in other words, and since you see it's essentially directly next to the area, behind the main kennel, then he could pull off pretty much any stunt, okay? If someone was there with the hose and he was, basically hosing him off, is what I'm going to say to that. And all it takes is just someone who's skilled at the act of getaway driving. They don't even have to be somebody who's skilled at crimes. They don't have to be somebody who's, really skilled at shooting. I showed you kind of what I was talking about with the, the trajectory with the bullet and so on. So the person involved, and let's say it is indeed Nathan in this case, because it's looking very, very plausible that it may well be Nathan. So we're going to go into that there. As long as he's skilled at being a getaway driver and he can, do things quickly, and they got the cabin directly next door, that's all you need. Thank you again. There's a lot in this case. Body within a period of about 14 seconds. It would actually take 38 seconds at minimum to move between the two areas there in the kennel. And of course, it's been proven he didn't turn over any of the bodies because there would have been some residue or something that would have been left behind. So he didn't actually turn them over, which is a very, very interesting part of this. But there were shell casings in the interior, right there directly by the doghouse. There was a shell casing that went through the chicken coop itself as well. And there was a shell casing that came kind of at an angle that would be towards where you would probably expect Alex would get into the vehicle, get into his car, and the getaway driver would then pretty much zoom right down the path to where you would presume he would go inside, his little cabin or his little hideaway. And so that was fascinating to see. They collected actual residue of the casings for the shell casings of blackout, the 300 blackout, but also birdshot was found in this area. And it wasn't from one of the activities that always take place on the estate. So that's what was real fascinating about that, because birdshot is an important element, and it was mentioned many times, of course, in the testimony when Tuten has that time where he starts, relaying certain things. They used birdshot all the time, and it's a key element that ties things back together then, because the birdshot and also some of the casings were found directly, really next to where Paul and Maggie were found. So that's a very, very key thing. And it explains that when Alex Murdaugh, likely shot Maggie, she was down on the ground, more in kind of a silent carrier position, a praying position, or a position where she kind of willingly was just going to allow whatever ends up occurring. He just need to go to the nearest vehicle, SUV or otherwise, hop right in. He could drive pretty much anywhere, and no one would be able to really track him that easily, just because of OnStar and that sort of thing. So if Alex had someone driving him, which appears to be the case that he did, then that would be the key element of why he got through this whole tragic endeavor so quickly. And of course, so given all these interesting realities and revelations about kind of, Nathan, Mr. Tuten's involvement essentially in the boat fiasco, the court case, similar court filings, that's certainly troubling revelations and a troubling situation overall, and he most certainly must be held responsible in that way. But there are some who will ask, a little more interesting questions, like, do I personally believe Nathan or this individual involved is a vampire or something of that effect? And I would just say he certainly has skin that's a little bit too white for most folks' sensibilities, is what I'll say about that. There are people out there who I would certainly term as vampire style. Not that they are necessarily the creature itself. Everyone, presumes, but they have kind of this way about them, this kind of presence about them, and they certainly capture that from the famous books and the mythos. That's the element that they captured most of all. So, although they are like anyone else, human in effect, they do have kind of that essence. And that's all I'd say about that. That's ultimately all that's important. But he certainly has some interesting particular issues about him. So thank you. More to come.
Hundreds of things. You can get stiffling from that also, because there's a massive explosion in these guns, and there's a lot of energy that leaks out. And that round could have ejected, struck her anywhere in the chest or in the back. We don't know the orientation of where she was standing and how he struck. If he struck her with a firearm that caused that gun to go off, because it could have been anything. She could have kicked him. She could have slapped the gun, and the gun went off in that orientation to hit the bird cage in the head. The round ejected, struck her, and then just landed, or the shell casing landed beside her.
Interesting. Okay, so that was position 3, and then our
3 and 4 are interchangeable because they're so dynamic. There's so much going on right here.
Sure. Okay, so keep playing. Sure. Thank you, Michelle. Chris and Steve are the best ever. Thank you so much. Yeah, too bad the dogs. Oops. Too bad the dogs can't talk. No kidding. So now we have. Now, of course, you had to lay her the body on the ground because now this is probably where she may be in the praying position. We heard
yes, 3 or 4, either from that side or this side. Now, the angle I think that went through her chest and entered through her throat into the base of the skull is probably in the one in the praying position.
Yep.
I didn't recreate that angle. I was just shooting into the ground, so she's not laying flat in that position of how that bullet would have possibly entered her if she's on her knees with her head on the ground. That would create that angle that would allow that pass through her chest and then to the base of her skull.
Yeah, and they feel like that once that hit her head, that would have been possibly fatal shot.
Yes.
Because it went through her breast, and that's so being in a praying position. I've kind of got it on my thumbnail. I guess if you were kind of standing behind her at an angle a little bit, it would have entered, because I guess it actually skimmed below her abdomen and then entered her breast, because she had like an abrasion just below the breast, so that would kind of make sense for it to travel just
to get that angle. That's one of the ways that you could, other than
some will of course ask, well, if all of that is the case and Nathan Tuten is indeed, involved in some manner, why in the world is this other video seemingly so unprofessional or not up to newscast standards or something like that? And I'm just letting you know, folks, my smartphone got completely taken out of commission for a while due to certain issues I unraveled and how close I got to seeing up close what was truly happening in the Murdaugh case and other situations. And I'm letting you know that, folks, because, I'm showing you I don't always have the, quote, really professional JTC channel and everything to back me. I'm just like everybody else, too. And so you're seeing me in my more unprofessional mode in this second video, so you can understand that no matter where you are in the world or what you think about the current Murdaugh situation and so on in the case as well overall, that people are starting to really form strong opinions. based upon verified evidence and based upon very valid claims that could potentially lead to something much, much more important occurring. My opinions are based upon facts and hard evidence. Now that I've seen Agent Wild testify and other agents who also testified earlier in the trial to the cell phone data pinging and being found basically in the same area of the road, coming away from that kind of canal area and going directly to the dog kennels, there is no way to explain. Any other explanation would not suffice for Alex Murdaugh's phone to be pinging in that, the exact area, especially inside the kennels, except that he was there. The other key issue here is I just can't buy the theory, and that's what it is, theory, that Alex Murdaugh, although he was involved with the murders, pulled all of this off entirely on his own and then left the dog kennels instantly right before 10 p.m. driving away. And when I looked at earlier records and court filings where Nathan Tuten's name was on the front, I saw that he also drove Murdaugh to and from various locations, quite often actually. So in that way, in the way that the evidence started to come out in certain scenarios, I started to believe more and more myself that clearly something else was going on, regardless of what anybody is thinking or talking about, that there was someone else connected to the Murdaugh case and situation. And I believe it is Tuten. And I firmly believe it can potentially be proven that it is Tuten as well. And there's testimony that he made on the stand which made my eyebrows raise. And perhaps a few other people, hopefully, that are out there. About the fact that he would shoot the 300 blackout rounds all the time near the dog kennels. And he would be basically with Paul Murdaugh all the time, nearly every day, over at the dog kennels. And interestingly enough, he was the key associate in PMPED, who apparently knew where a lot of the funds ended up going missing. So there are key questions and other key questions that remain for me about the fact that perhaps Sled didn't even know the truth about this individual, about this man, but that he was literally at the head of the Walterboro Police Department, at least in some way in analysis, because he would take care of OnStar type of issues. He would take care of electric. This is the hard evidence of the actual bird shot. It confirms that they found and recovered bird shot directly at the crime scene in the kennel of the dog kennels area and so on. And bird shot is a perfect match and perfect description to what you saw in the Tuten testimony, of course, when he testifies about what he did. Maybe saying a little bit more than should normally be spoken. But when he speaks with very crystal clarity about how he, and Paul Murdaugh and another person would always shoot off bird shot all the time, well into June, well into that time period. So anyway.
This is what's in the pump.
So those aren't regular shotgun shells or anything. They find in the trash just, original bird shot pellets. Some which were seen, are recovered near the actual crime scene. And there's some that are just out there, you know, on the target ranges and things like that. But they aren't this specific type of bird shot. So there was some that were directly. Once again, wonder and ponder exactly what the nature of these facts mean and what they entail. And you're going to see in the video the actual trajectory of the bullet. You're going to see how it came in at an angle, almost demonstratively so, by the actual context of the video. And so it couldn't have just been someone shooting straight across. You'll see why it makes the most sense. Alex perhaps stumbled, or he had some kind of sudden movement with his feet, because the angle of the shot is the only way that it truly finally makes complete sense. You'll also see some interesting examples, as was specified, about the cabin. The cabin being located directly next to the dog kennel in this particular instance. And how Fast Eddie, aka Eddie Smith, was connected directly to Tuten on more than 3 separate occasions, going by some of the legal documents that are in the video. And some may be wondering, you know, again, if this is really true and the person living in the cabin, namely Tuten, was most certainly involved, why hasn't the state really brought that up yet? Again, we're going based upon only the evidence and the available evidence, as well as the actual physical trajectory of the bullet. And I can tell you this, folks, the state, aka the prosecution, has some real zingers that they're holding on to. And if that ends up making this trial drag out just a little bit longer, or last for just a certain period of time longer, to get things 100% crystal clear on what occurred around Eddie Smith and why Tuten's name, you know, was legally placed on the documents, and also it's in the file for the actual boat. If it takes that, you'll see it likely be extended to a certain extent. But I'm just basically pointing out, you know, the way that this makes the most sense is Alex Murdaugh had a physical getaway driver. And that getaway driver, going by the events that are exclusively presented here, right here on the JTC channel, shows that it couldn't have just been somebody that Murdaugh ran into. It more than likely had to be Tuten. And you will see more examples of that physically as this goes on. Thank you. There will also be an open air chat on this. Don't forget, we're going to be taking questions on important cases, not just the Murdaugh case, the smiley face killer case, and other cases which are very, very important and prominent in the sphere now. These things, no matter what, need to be resolved. And you will see during the course of these events, these things are getting resolved. Thank you.